We're here in Sedona by the incredible Bell Rock with Goff, author of The Ancient World's Foundation Stone, Corrections to the Field. We have a few questions for you, Mr. Goff. Are you ready for this?
Absolutely.
All right. Mr. Drunvalo Melchizedek of Flower of Life fame once told me you were the next step in sacred geometry. How do you feel about that?
Well, since the Flower of Life chose to only work with the first rotation around the original circle while there are three, I would have to agree with him, at least in that regard.
Amazing. And although you were never a Flower of Life facilitator, I believe your wife was, and Drunvalo asked you and your wife to open Europe for the Flower of Life. Was that fun for you?
It was a blast. It was actually a very funny story because when we were asked to go, he didn't want to go. He was like, I don't want to go. He goes, look, you'll make a bunch of money. It'll be fun. You'll have a great time. And we just made new audio tapes and videotapes. So when we went and actually opened up for Europe, there was about 60 people there from all around Europe. And what became really a hysterical moment was that these brand new tapes that we received, the audio was completely screwed up. And so about every half an hour we'd have to turn off the video, and I would literally have to get up against the wall in this converted monastery into a retreat center and repeat almost word for word everything that he said. So it really forced me to use my brain quite a bit more, actually remembering all these things and putting it forward. And of course, if I made even a smidgen of a mistake, I would get called on by someone else. Oh, don't forget blah. Oh yes, okay. So it was a blast, yes, we did actually open up Europe for the Flower of Life. The one thing Drew did ask us to do, of course, when we went there was that we not be too good as facilitators. He didn't want people to attach themselves to us. He wanted them to attach themselves to the Flower of Life. So we did our best to do that for him.
And you obviously must know the material fairly well after having to repeat it verbatim for the crowd. I understand, however, that when Drunvalo's work was first brought to you, someone came to you and said, hey, this guy's doing your drawings. You might want to check him out.
Yes, that was right after Hurricane Iniki back in '91. I was on Kauai, and a friend of mine came to me who was getting ready to leave for Utah to do some massage work. And he had said, hey, I was at this gal's house who just happened to have a generator, and the only thing anyone was watching were the bootleg tapes that supposedly got put out by Drunvalo. And when that occurred, he goes, he's talking about some pretty outrageous things, but I noticed a lot of the drawings he was doing looked a lot like yours. So when I finally got the opportunity to actually look at his workbook, I'd noticed that over half of the images in there I'd already drawn, but he had actually made certain statements about those images which I had not really put any attention on. I am into geometry itself and wasn't looking to create a story around them, so I was fascinated that someone had. Whether or not I believe all of those stories is a completely different subject, and I will say probably not, but nonetheless, it was still intriguing enough that we went ahead and went through the workshop to see what exactly was being promoted.
So you spent quite a bit of time with Drunvalo yourself. Tell us, what's your favorite Drunvalo story?
Oh, my favorite Drunvalo story. Well, I had the opportunity to help him move his house from Austin, Texas, to Cave Creek when he was first moving to Arizona. And we were hanging out and we were talking, and I was just kind of being a smart aleck, and I happened to say Jesus Christ, and literally in that very moment a lightning bolt struck a tree about 40 feet away from us, and Drew goes, oh, don't use the Lord's name in vain. I said, you're right, I shouldn't do that. So that was really one of the funniest things. And of course, when we played ping pong, when we actually got him moved to Cave Creek, I beat him 2 or 3 times in a row, and he just said, oh, I'm kind of tired, I'm done playing ping pong. So I realized Drew doesn't really like losing.
And would you say that Drunvalo has made any efforts or any of his work was successful in bringing the knowledge to the general layperson that there was more to geometry than perhaps they might have noticed?
Well, the Flower of Life images all around the world at this point, so he's really the one that promoted it to the extent that you find that people are tattooing it on their bodies. They've made all kinds of artwork, jewelry, and etc. The one thing that actually disturbed me a little bit, though, is that while all this is going on, hardly anyone was actually exploring anything geometrically beyond the actual Flower of Life model that he presented. And right before he finished his first book, I had the opportunity to critique that work, and we got kind of in a little bit of a debate over what the two outer circles of the Flower of Life symbol were. After about an hour and a half of discussion, he finally said to me, "Ty, rather than me change my story, why don't you just teach your story?" And I go, "Well, you know, Drew, when I finally come out, I'm going to have to point at where I believe you've made mistakes." And he just kind of goes, "Well, you know, that's your experience, so I can't say anything about that." And of course, from my point of view, in the Flower of Life model and in specifically Metatron's cube, my issue was that when you're teaching something and you're calling it sacred geometry, I would expect the geometry to be accurate. And that was one of my main concerns, was that the two images, in the Metatron's cube that he's calling the feminine component of the grid, which is the icosahedron and dodecahedron, that both of them are actually skewed. And so I go, "Drew, that's like you're crucifying the feminine to the masculine cross when you're actually trying to promote people to connect to the feminine. So if you're wondering why people aren't getting their meditations correct, maybe that's the reason."
And that was at least partially the impetus for the book, Corrections to the Field, the first in the series of 3.
Yes, it is. There are so many stories about who built the pyramids and how old they are, and whether or not it's a unified model or whether or not the Great Pyramid itself was built, 13,000 years ago. And I just finished